Hey guys, welcome to Matt Keeps Fish. Today we are doing possibly the most difficult care guide that I've ever done, but you guys love this fish, so let's try our best. The reason that this fish is so very difficult to do a care guide on is because it is impossible to get good shots of, because it's constantly hiding. I had to rip out all the hardscape, and even now it's been like 10 minutes and they're all hiding in the filter or beside the filter. So these guys are nocturnal. They're not going to want to come out when there's a light on. Their eyes are very sensitive to light. They're mostly going to be finding food through feeling, and we're going to talk about that later in the video. If we look closely at their face right here, I got some great shots of their face. If you look closely, you see those big black eyes, big pupil in there, right? So these guys are mostly nocturnal, so the eye is mostly pupil. They're picking up any little bits of light. So make sure that you have caves for them because they're not going to want to be exposed to highlights too often. You can have highlights, just make sure that you got some rocks and some wood and some caves and stuff for them to get away from it. If we look up close to their face, we see these pupils, we see these barbels, 6 right around the mouth, and like I said, those are going to be useful for feeding, which we'll talk about later in the video. Mine have stripes. Now there's a range of different Pangeo loaches. I think that's the right way to say it. So Kuhli loaches are only one type of Pangeo loach. There's a whole genus, and they're all pretty much the same, except for maybe slight differences in size and pretty obvious differences in patterning. So there's some that have stripes all the way around. There's some with stripes stopping at the belly. Some of them have like little tan dots going all the way down their body. Some are completely black. Lots of different types, but they all cohabitate together and they all pretty much have the same behavior. So although I could call this a Pangeo loach video, Kuhli loaches are better known and they're all pretty much the same. These guys are not meant for swimming at all. They, if you look down the end of their body, you can see that the dorsal fin, I think it's the dorsal fin, I don't know if it's like the secondary dorsal fin is just completely faded from existence, but the dorsal fin at the end of the body, very small, not very useful for stability. I'm not sure these guys even have a swim bladder, which is what most fish use to control their buoyancy, because these guys are on the bottom level 24/7. You'll notice that they do have a big square caudal fin or tail fin, and those guys really use it, right? Like they are powerful with that. When they want to get away, boom, they're gone, right? So these guys can be very fast swimmers. They're very good at getting out of harm's way. You know what? I think they have, just looking at them now, I think they have very small anal fins, and those are probably used for breeding in some kind of way. But if we go up to the front of their body, right behind their head, they've got these pectoral fins, you know, they've got these side fins, and they're used a lot less for controlling swimming and a lot more for kind of walking around and propping themselves up and stuff like that. So they're very cool behaviors, not like any other fish you've seen. And then of course they've got that tiny little pointed face. Now we'll talk about what they eat later, but they don't eat snails. Talk about that later. What you will notice if you're looking up close and if you're keeping them on a sand substrate, which I do recommend, you'll notice that they're sucking in sand, they're sucking in the substrate and the mulm and stuff like that between those barbels, and they're pushing it out through their gills right above their pectoral fins. So it's a really cool behavior to watch. If you can see these fish, they're very interesting to look at. Now, one more thing to mention is these fish don't really have scales. And why does that matter? It matters because they're more sensitive to things that scaled fish wouldn't otherwise be. So with these guys, they've got teeny tiny little scales along their body, pretty much no scales on their head. And what that means for the fish is they can get scratched easier, you know. They're pretty much fully dependent on that slime coat for protection, not on their scales, because their scales, again, are very small. It also means that like a frog or something like that, something that absorbs through the skin, these guys are going to absorb medications and stuff through the skin. So you got to be very careful when you medicate these guys. It's actually almost not recommended at all to medicate these guys. Now, not to scare you with any of that stuff, because I have had mine for a year. I've only lost 1 out of 7, and they've done very well. These fish are very, very sturdy. There's stories about people draining their tanks, and this fish is still alive like a week later, even though there's no water in the tank, because they're bulletproof, these fish, except for when it comes to medications. Now, when it comes to lifespan, these guys have been rumored to live for around 12 years, which is a very long time, although pretty typical of very relaxed fish like this. When they get to that full lifespan, they have been known to max out around 4 inches, although these guys, I've only had them for a year, and I got them when they were very small, and they seem to be around 4 inches now. So expect them to hit that full size very quickly. Now, the question is, should you get a Kuhli Loach for your aquarium? And to find out, we're going to go through our 5 categories, which are housing, behavior, feeding, tank mates, and availability. When it comes to housing, I would recommend 10 gallons of space for 6 of these guys. You are going to want to keep them in a group. I find that 10 gallons is just enough space to be able to provide them hiding spots. Now, if you wanted to keep just these guys, you could probably do 5 gallons. You know, you don't need height, so if you wanted to do something very low and very long, that would be a perfect tank for them. But I would say do at least 6 per every 10 gallons of space that you give them. And the reason behind that is these guys are very nervous. They need to be kept together. They're not a schooling fish per se, but I don't know what else to call it when the fish just kind of like flop on each other 24/7. These guys love hanging out together. So I would say at least 6. Do them in a 10 gallon or something. You know, if you want to do a 5 gallon that's like 6 inches tall, that would be awesome, because these guys really don't care about height. Just make sure you have a lid on there, because they are perfectly capable of jumping out of your aquarium. So, and in terms of the environment, make sure that you give these guys a lot of cover. They love being able to move around under shade. So if you have a thick floating carpet of hornwort or something like that, like I do, these guys will be perfectly comfortable swimming around under that. Absolutely no issues. In fact, that's what I might actually do when this aquarium gets renovated, and that way they won't be hiding behind the rocks all the time, because they tend to do that. Moving on to the behavior of Kuhli Loaches, they kind of have 2 modes. There's chill and crackhead. With the chill mode, they are lying in the shade, like I said, lying underneath some driftwood that you've got hanging over top of them, or some plants or something like that, just sifting through the sand, looking for any snacks. These guys are scavengers, so they're just going to be kind of constantly looking around for food, avoiding predators whenever need be. But if a light comes on, or if you move, or if you like tap your glass down on the desk nearby, they will completely freak out. They'll zip up, they'll zip down, they'll bury themselves in the sand, which I haven't seen yet, and I really wish that I saw more of that behavior, because burrowing is so cool to me. Wait for a future update on that. But yeah, two crazy modes. So if they do freak out like that, don't be worried. You know, especially when you do a water change, or you've just added them to the aquarium, you might find that they're a little bit erratic. Nothing to be worried about. They're just settling in. Once they find a nice cave, or at least they know where the caves are, they're going to feel a lot more comfortable. Now, I said before, make sure that there's a bunch of these guys, because the more there are, the more you're going to see them. Not just because there's more to see, but because when they have more company around, they'll kind of move as like a big squiggly group towards food, and they just have no fear. So make sure that you keep them together, and don't be freaked out when they go crazy. One thing I will mention about their behavior is that these guys are super, super, super peaceful. Like the most peaceful fish ever. Like, they are rivaling cherry shrimp in how peaceful these guys are. And on that note, they don't eat cherry shrimp. They don't eat any kind of fry. They don't eat snails, which I kind of alluded to before. Even though most loaches eat snails, these guys do not eat snails. All of these guys eat, which we'll get to later, is just kind of like leftovers. Now, next up is feeding. What do you give these guys? And the answer is pretty much anything. I would say go light on the vegetables, high on the protein. But whatever you do, make sure it sinks down to wherever their cave is. If it's out in the open and you have a bunch of other fish, that food's going to be gone before they can ever get to it. Now, if it's a Kuhli Loach only tank, that's amazing. You know, just throw the food in just before lights out. You're going to want to throw the food in before lights out no matter what kind of setup you have, because that's when they're going to be actively searching for it. Make sure that they are getting some kind of food. I would say, like I have the Bug Bites Pleco formula. That seems to work pretty well for them to nibble on. But with these guys, they don't eat a lot. Like I said before, you can keep them in a pretty small tank, 10 gallons for 6 of them, right? And they each get 4 inches. But the reason for that is they have a very small bio load and they tend to not eat that much. You know, they're going to pick at food every once in a while. These guys are scavengers. They're meant to live on very little amounts of nutrients. What I would say and what I would argue for once again is that whatever you feed them, make sure that it's sinking and it's sinking onto sand. These guys love to sift. It's an awesome behavior to watch. So I would recommend it for that, but I would also say that it's nearly necessary because although they live out in the wild, and we've done a video on this before, it'll be right there. When they're living out in the wild, there's a lot of sharp rocks, you know, and people are like, hey, there's sharp rocks there. Why can't I keep sharp rocks in my aquarium? Because they die in the wild. That's why. Are Kuhli loaches perfectly capable of living in less than optimal conditions? Yeah, absolutely. But since we're keeping them in an aquarium anyways, shouldn't we just give them optimal conditions? Yeah, we probably should. So I would say give them sand so that when they're searching around for food, when they're digging into the ground, they're not cutting up their face, which we said, you know, it doesn't have any scales on it, so you're gonna want to make sure their face is nice and comfy in the aquarium. So give them sand. You might as well, and that's just helpful for feeding. If you guys want to get really clever with it, go for live worms or freeze-dried or frozen worms and bury them in the sand, and they love searching for them like that. I haven't tried it yet, but I've seen it and it looks really cool. Next up are tank mates. Now, if you are building your aquarium, you're getting fish that are good with Kuhli loaches, you're kind of building your tank around Kuhli loaches like I kind of did. This is good knowledge for you, you know, like, but if this is just another thing that you want to keep with the fish you already have, this is also where you need to perk up and see if they're actually compatible, because Kuhli loaches probably won't go so well with Oscars, you know, they're probably going to get eaten. Will they survive a ridiculously long time with Oscars? Yeah, probably. Like these guys, I wouldn't doubt it if you said that you had kept them for a year with your Oscar, but on that note, don't. You know, just because they've survived without getting eaten doesn't mean that you should put them in a place where they're liable to get eaten, you know? So these fish can be kept with literally anything. They're not going to eat your shrimp, they're not going to eat your fry, they're not going to eat your snails. They're going to be very good at not being eaten by other fish. I've seen them being kept with like Raphael catfish, which is like this, it's a pretty substantial scavenging catfish that eat pretty much everything. But Kuhli loaches, because they're really darty, because they've got that slime coat, because they can dig into the gravel, right? They're very survivable. But again, keep them with more peaceful fish, I would say. Keep them with more surface dwellers than bottom dwellers, because you want to make sure that food is getting to the Kuhli loaches. Now, like I said before, mine reached the full 4-inch size in 1 year, and they were being kept with a bunch of different bottom feeders. So can they survive on very minimal amounts of food? Yes, but make sure that they're getting some food. So don't overcram that bottom layer. Make sure that you're feeding right before lights out so these guys can get a snack. Next up, and probably the least useful for you guys, is the availability category. Can you find them? Yeah, probably. PetSmart sells black Kuhli loaches. I think they sell banded Kuhli loaches as well. You can find them at pretty much any local pet store. They're in very high demand 24/7 because they can be kept with pretty much anything, and they're super cool to look at, and they are hardy and bulletproof and everything. So you're not gonna have any trouble finding these guys. I got mine for like $3 each, so chances are they're still gonna stay very cheap. So should you get one of these guys? Yeah, pretty much like in any tank, like in any circumstance, you should get these guys. They're very hardy. They don't need to eat a lot. They get along with pretty much every fish that's not going to eat them. Sand, if you already have a sand tank, that would be perfect for them if you could do that. Otherwise, you know, it's not a super big deal. Just make sure that they're not gonna like cut their faces in half with a sharp piece of gravel. So, should you get a Kuhli Loach? Yeah, pretty much in like any circumstance, you should get a bunch of Kuhli Loaches. Unless you've got like a super tiny tank or you've got a bowl with like no heating. That's another thing I'll mention. You're gonna want to make sure these guys have tropical temperatures. So like I'd say like 75 is around there. 75 to 80 would be perfect for them. Can they survive in less than optimal temperatures and environments in general? Yeah, but don't do that to them. Keep them in a good environment, give them a nice long life, and they'll do really well for you. So I hope this helped in making your decision on whether or not you should get a Kuhli Loach. Chances are you probably should. You should probably get like 6 of them at least. And when you do, send me a comment because I want to hear how it goes. Okay? As for now, thanks for watching. If you like this video, leave a like. If you want to see more care guides like this, I'm hopefully going to be doing more care guides. I've been slacking. Subscribe, and I won't let you down. And I'll see you guys next Sunday.